Russia and Japan are separated by just a narrow band of water. Two world powers, two modern nations, and no road between them. Why you can't drive from Russia to Japan is a secret that I'll reveal to you now. Russia and Japan are neighbors on a map, separated by a narrow sea. And when you look at the globe, it feels like a simple question. If Siberia sits right above northern Japan, why is there no bridge, tunnel, or ferry that you can drive onto, and nothing that connects the two countries by land? The distance seems almost trivial. From Russia's Sakhalin Island to Japan's Hokkaido, the gap narrows to fewer than 45 kilometers. It's shorter than the channel crossing between Britain and France, shorter than bridges already built in China, Denmark, or the Middle East. But this tiny strip of ocean hides a combination of geography, engineering nightmares, extreme weather, shifting tectonic plates, political tension, and economic reality, all wrapped into one barrier that nobody has ever managed to defeat. To understand why the road doesn't exist, you have to start at the edge of Russia, where the world's largest country meets the world's most unforgiving sea. Russia stretches across 11 time zones, ending in a far eastern region where the landscape is so remote that most of Russia's own citizens never see it. The last major settlement lies thousands of kilometers away from Moscow. Beyond that are forests, frozen ground, earthquakes, and vast emptiness. To reach Japan by road, you would first have to reach Russia's eastern islands, and that alone is nearly impossible. The highway network in this part of Russia ends long before the coast. Many towns rely on seasonal ice roads, temporary bridges, or ferries that operate only a few months out of the year. Even the Trans-Siberian Highway, one of the longest roads in the world, doesn't extend cleanly to the most narrow point between Russia and Japan. It stops in an environment where freezing winds, coastal storms, and earthquakes all break infrastructure faster than it can be repaired. And if you tried to drive east until the road ran out, you would eventually reach the coast of Sakhalin, Russia's long, narrow island that stretches south towards Japan. Getting there requires crossing the Tatar Strait, another body of water with almost no permanent crossings. Russia had once considered building a tunnel, but the Soviet Union abandoned the project before completion. The remains of the old work sites do still exist, silent monuments on how difficult even the first step of the route would be. But the real challenge begins only after you reach Sakhalin, because the gap between Sakhalin and Japan is the true barrier that stops everything. The water between Sakhalin and Japan's Hokkaido Island is called the Soya Strait. It's narrow, shallow, and one of the harshest stretches of water in the Pacific, and it's famous for its violent currents. Warm currents from the south collide with freezing from the north, creating unpredictable surges that will shift direction quickly. Waves rise without warning, storms hit suddenly, and in winter, the strait fills with drifting sea ice that crashes against anything built in or near the water. Engineers predicted a bridge here would be battered with powerful ice, powerful enough to destroy steel. A tunnel, meanwhile, would be threatened by the powerful earthquakes that strike the region. Hokkaido lies on the boundary of several tectonic plates, and the entire strait is part of the seismically active Ring of Fire, where quakes and volcanic activity are constant. A 2018 Hokkaido earthquake, reaching a magnitude of 6.6, damaged roads, bridges, power grids, and entire towns. A tunnel beneath the region would be exposed to pressure and shaking far more great than the Channel Tunnel or Japan's own Seikan Tunnel. Japan already built the Seikan Tunnel, currently the world's second longest undersea tunnel that connects Honshu and Hokkaido. That one took more than 20 years, cost tens of billions of dollars, and still remains one of the most technically complicated underground structures ever built. Making something similar would be even more difficult. The geology is worse, the earthquakes are stronger, and the distance is still long enough to require deep engineering solutions that no realistic budget could support. But even if the engineers could somehow defeat all of the barriers, another question remains: why build it at all? Bridges and tunnels are built when they bring economic value, trade, tourism, industrial links, and population movement. Between Russia and Japan, the incentives barely exist. Hokkaido, the northernmost island of Japan, has a population of roughly 5 million. Sakhalin has fewer than 500,000. The population just doesn't justify a multi-billion-dollar connection. Cars and trucks don't travel the route, tourists don't line up to drive between the countries, and trade between them moves primarily by ship and not by road. Even the most optimistic of projections show that a bridge or tunnel would lose money for decades. Japan would spend enormous sums building a connection to a sparsely inhabited part of Russia with limited economic output. Russia, meanwhile, would have to extend highways across remote territory, through frozen ground and over unstable terrain, just to link a tunnel or bridge to the rest of the country. The cost would be astronomical, the benefit would be tiny. No corporation wants to invest, no government wants to fund it, and no partnership between the two nations has ever survived long strong enough to make it realistic. But money alone doesn't stop projects. Politics can kill them long before the first blueprint is drawn. Even if engineers solve the physical problems, the political relationship between Russia and Japan has been tense for more than 75 years. The two countries have still not signed a formal peace treaty after the Second World War, and the reason is a territorial dispute over the Kuril Islands, a chain that stretches between Japan and Russia. At the end of the war, Soviet forces occupied several islands that Japan considers historically theirs. Russia controls them today, Japan wants them back, and a dispute has blocked negotiations for a peace treaty for decades. Any large infrastructure project linking the countries would immediately become entangled in the conflict. Japan doesn't want to build a bridge or tunnel that could weaken its territorial claims, and Russia doesn't want to concede islands or allow Japan greater access to the region. The trust is low, the diplomacy is inconsistent, and the political environment makes long-term cooperation, the kind needed for a mega project, almost impossible. And politics aren't the only tension. Nature adds another threat, one that engineers cannot design against. Japan sits as one of the most active tectonic intersections on Earth. Earthquakes are constant, volcanoes surround the island chain, and the sea floor shifts regularly where pressure builds along the fault lines. The 2011 earthquake was one of the strongest ever recorded and triggered a tsunami that destroyed coastal towns and damaged infrastructure across the country. The event was powerful enough to stop future tunnel discussions in their tracks. Connecting Japan to Russia by tunnel or bridge would place the structure in one of the most dangerous seismic zones in the world. If that tunnel were built at great depth, an earthquake could rupture the lining or flood the route. And if a bridge were built above sea level, a tsunami would destroy it entirely. Japan's own scientists repeatedly warned that a fixed link to Russia could only exist if it survived rare events of massive power, ones that have happened many times over in Japan's history and will likely happen again. Earthquakes stop a tunnel, ice stops a bridge, and politics stop cooperation. But there's one more obstacle, a sea that transforms every winter. The Soya Strait doesn't remain the same all year. In winter, it freezes partially, sending thick slabs of drifting ice southward. This sea ice is pushed by strong winds and currents, crashing into anything in its path with tremendous force. For ships, it's a challenge, for bridges, devastation, and for tunnels, it's a flooding risk. Any fixed structure in this region would have to resist ice pressure from all sides, something extremely difficult even for the smallest of bridges, let alone a multi-kilometer mega project. Even Japan's coastal infrastructure requires constant repair because of ice damage. A massive international bridge would be nearly impossible to maintain, especially across a stretch of a remote location. And even if all these natural barriers vanished, a road still wouldn't exist because the demand isn't there. While millions of people travel between Japan and Russia by air or sea, very few would make the journey by car if a road existed. Most travel between the nations are business, tourism, or freight, and all are more efficient by air or by ship. The population centers of Japan are far south of Hokkaido. Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya lie hundreds of kilometers from the potential connection point. Russia's population centers lie thousands of kilometers west of Sakhalin, and driving the distance would take days or even weeks across isolated highways. Commercial freight would prefer ships, which carries thousands of containers at once, and a road would exist mostly for symbolism and not practicality. But perhaps the biggest reason that no road exists is that Japan has already built the most extreme tunnel ever, and even that almost broke the country. The Seikan Tunnel, connecting Japan's Honshu and Hokkaido islands, stretches out almost 54 kilometers, longer than the Channel Tunnel. It crosses deep under dangerous waters, cutting through volcanic rock, unstable geology, and fault lines. The project faced enormous challenges like floods, explosions, rock collapses, and loss of life. And even after completion, it remains one of the most expensive infrastructure projects in human history. Engineers have repeatedly said the tunnel is likely the most difficult that Japan will ever attempt, and the idea of building something so dangerous under the Soya Strait in worse geological conditions has been dismissed by Japanese experts for decades. Japan simply doesn't want another mega project of that scale in an even more unstable environment. And if Japan and Russia won't build it, the only thing left to understand is the final truth. The route was never meant to be crossed by land. It's not distance, technology, political rivalry, or even geography. It's the fact that every element of the connection fails at the same time. The sea is too violent, earthquakes are too strong, and ice is too destructive. Engineering costs are too high, economics make no sense, politics are unstable, and the population demand is low. Every major factor that normally encourages a bridge or tunnel doesn't exist here, and every factor that prevents one is unusually powerful. The result becomes a perfect storm of reasons, structural, natural, financial, and political, that together make any land connection between Russia and Japan almost impossible. The road ends here, the continent stops, and the only connection between these two nations remains through the sky and the sea. The distance between Russia and Japan is tiny, but the barrier is enormous. A fragile strait hides brutal currents, drifting ice, unstable geology, and some of the most unpredictable tectonic activity on Earth. A bridge couldn't survive, a tunnel wouldn't last, and the politics don't align. The world's engineers have accepted that nature has closed this route permanently. Asia almost reaches Japan, but in the Soya Strait, the continent is forced to surrender to the ocean. It's the place where the land stops, nature wins, and the dream of driving from Russia to Japan ends before it even begins. The world is full of mysteries, and we're here to crack them. Thanks for watching World Cracked. Be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.